bullet was meant for him. In the half-second before it struck, something hurled itself into the line of fire. A body built by loyalty, moving faster than fear, faster than death. Blood soaked the ground, but the man lived. Not because he fought back, not because he deserved it, because somewhere in the ruins of his life, something still believed he was worth saving. You don't know who he is yet. You don't know who made that choice. But by the time you do, it will be too late to look away. If this moment speaks to you, if it reminds you that loyalty can survive even the darkest war, stay with us. Like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Some stories are not told in words. They are written in blood, breath, and the last beat of a heart that refuses to break. The night was cold, wrapping the lonely house in a shroud of stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden beams. Jack Hayes, a retired Army sergeant, sat motionless at the edge of his bed, his broad, scarred hands resting heavily on his knees. Outside, the wind murmured through the pines like distant whispers of the battlefield he had left behind years ago. The clock ticked mercilessly toward 2 a.m., and Jack hadn't slept a single minute. It had been months since he truly rested, and it wasn't just the usual scars of war haunting him. Something else lurked in his subconscious. Something darker, something primal. He rubbed his eyes, gritting his teeth against the weariness sinking into his bones. Lying down felt like an invitation to terror now, not peace. And every time he closed his eyes, the nightmare returned the same night. Always the same. The sharp crack of gunfire ripping the night apart, the acrid stench of smoke, and then the howling, an endless, soul-ripping howl from a dog he couldn't see, but felt in his marrow. The worst part wasn't just seeing it, it was feeling it, as if that agony was his own. Jack leaned back onto the mattress, exhaling slowly. Beside the bed, lying curled into a tight ball, was Rex, his German shepherd. Once a mighty K9 on the front lines, Rex had aged into a loyal, graying guardian. His ears twitched slightly, catching Jack's every breath. Jack gave a small, absent-minded pat to Rex's thick coat and tried to calm his racing heart. Maybe tonight, he thought, maybe tonight would be different. Maybe the ghosts would leave him alone. But deep down, he knew better. As he finally closed his eyes, exhaustion dragging him down into the black sea of dreams, the nightmare surged forward almost instantly, like a predator waiting just out of sight. The familiar sequence began, the thundering gunshots, the blinding flashes of explosions, and then the howl, that endless, blood-curdling howl that seemed to come from the very pit of hell itself. Jack jerked in his sleep, his body locking into a rigid arch as his heart raced wildly. Then, without warning, he felt it, the sudden, undeniable weight pressing down onto his chest. Jack gasped and snapped awake, his vision blurry with panic, only to find Rex standing squarely atop him, his powerful paws planted firmly over Jack's heart. The dog's golden brown eyes stared into his, with an intensity Jack hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Jack lay still, his breath coming in shallow gulps, the last echoes of the nightmare dissolving into the room's chilly air. Rex didn't move. He stayed pressed against Jack's chest as if anchoring him back to reality, refusing to let the darkness drag him under again. Jack blinked in stunned silence. It wasn't the first time Rex had done this, but somehow tonight it felt different, more urgent, more deliberate. Shaking, Jack eased Rex off and sat up fully, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. What was happening to him? Was it really PTSD playing cruel tricks, or was it something more? Jack glanced at Rex, who had now settled back onto the floor but kept his gaze locked on him. His ears pricked forward in full alertness. Jack wiped the sweat from his forehead, unsettled. There was no rational explanation for it, but a small voice inside him whispered that Rex wasn't merely reacting instinctively. He was predicting it. Somehow Rex knew when the nightmares were coming. Somehow Rex was fighting alongside him even now, against enemies unseen. Jack swung his legs over the bed and stood shakily, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He poured himself a glass of water, his reflection staring back at him from the kitchen window. Haggard, hollow-eyed, a man half-eaten by fears he couldn't name. The house was filled with memories. Faded photographs of his unit lined the hallway, the American flag neatly folded in a glass case on the mantel. He had survived deserts, jungles, endless nights under foreign stars. But here, in the supposed safety of home, Jack felt more hunted than he ever had in combat. He shuffled back toward the bedroom, Rex's claws clicking softly against the hardwood behind him. He knew sleep would not come again tonight. It was pointless to try. Instead, he sat in the armchair by the window, staring into the darkness beyond. Hours dragged by. He watched the stars wheel overhead in their ancient silent paths. Rex eventually rested his heavy head on Jack's knee, and for a moment, a fragile peace settled between man and dog. But deep in Jack's gut, the unease remained. There was something inside those dreams, something unfinished, some secret that refused to stay buried. And Rex, somehow, was the key to keeping it from consuming him completely. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of bruised violet and gold, Jack made himself a silent promise. He would find out what these dreams meant, because if he didn't, he feared that one night, Rex wouldn't be enough to save him. And Jack didn't know if he could save himself anymore. The next night crept in like a slow poison, thick with mist that clung to the fields outside Jack's lonely farmhouse. He sat in the armchair by the window again, his body tense, his mind weighed down by the events of the previous night. Rex lay curled at his feet, but he wasn't sleeping. His ears were sharply tuned to Jack's every shift and sigh. Jack felt it, the looming dread growing heavier with each tick of the clock, as if some unseen force was inching closer breath by breath. Around 1:45 a.m., Jack gave up the pretense of reading the battered novel in his lap and decided, against his instincts, to attempt sleep once more. He stretched out across the bed, feeling the old mattress sigh beneath his weight, and closed his eyes. Silence filled the room, so absolute that it roared in his ears. He felt Rex shift slightly but dismissed it as nothing. However, just as Jack hovered between waking and dreaming, something unusual happened. Rex, who had been lying completely still, suddenly rose, sniffing the air as if detecting a scent no human could possibly notice. His hackles rose slightly, and he let out a low, almost inaudible whine. Jack stirred, sensing Rex's agitation even through the heavy veil of exhaustion. But he couldn't fight it. Sleep pulled him under like a riptide. The nightmare crashed into him without warning, the familiar gunfire, the choking smoke, the unrelenting howling. But this time, Jack noticed something new. A burning sensation across his chest, faint at first, then steadily intensifying. In the real world, Rex began to pace frantically beside the bed, his nose working furiously against the air, his body tense and alert, while Jack, trapped in the nightmare, arched his back in pain, a strangled cry caught in his throat. Rex's instincts overrode everything else. With a sudden leap, he launched himself onto Jack's body, pressing his paws firmly against the veteran's chest, just as Jack's breathing faltered into desperate gasps. Jack awoke with a violent jolt, the scream dying on his lips, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. He clutched at his chest, gasping for air, and that's when he felt it, the old scar, the one just above his heart from a shrapnel blast years ago, was pulsing with heat as if something deep inside him had been awakened. His skin burned under his fingertips, not from friction, not from any external injury, but from something else entirely. Rex stared up at him with fierce, almost human intensity, his body still rigid, his breathing heavy. Jack peeled off his sweat-soaked t-shirt, staring in disbelief at the scar, now flushed a deep, angry red. He stumbled to the bathroom mirror, flicking on the harsh fluorescent light, and leaned in. The scar, usually a faded, almost invisible line, now throbbed visibly, glowing faintly like embers under his skin. Panic surged up Jack's spine, raw and electric. He splashed cold water over his face, trying to steady himself, but every fiber of his being screamed that this was no ordinary bodily reaction. Behind him, Rex sat at the bathroom door, unblinking, as if keeping guard not against something outside but something brewing inside Jack himself. Jack gripped the sides of the sink, trying to anchor himself to reality, but his mind spiraled with questions. Was he losing his mind? Was the past clawing its way back into the present through his body? He staggered back into the bedroom, his breath shallow, every nerve ending lit up like live wire. Rex shadowed his every move, never more than a few inches away, always watching, always waiting. Jack sat heavily on the edge of the bed, one hand pressed against his burning scar, the other fisting the bedsheet in silent terror. The house seemed to close in around him, the walls whispering memories he had buried long ago. He tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a nerve reaction. Maybe the doctors had missed something when they patched him up after that mission gone wrong in the sandblasted wastelands overseas. But deep inside, Jack knew it was more than that. This wasn't just his mind betraying him. This was his body warning him. Rex nudged his hand gently with his nose, grounding him for a moment. Jack looked into those soulful brown eyes and felt a flicker of the old bond they had shared in battlefields far away. Rex had saved him countless times before. Maybe he was trying to save him now from an enemy Jack couldn't even name. The hours dragged by. Jack didn't dare close his eyes again. He stayed awake, hypervigilant, feeling the periodic waves of heat roll off the scar. Each pulse bringing with it flashes of fragmented memory, shouts in a foreign tongue, gunfire ricocheting off broken stone, and always the same mournful howl cutting through it all. By sunrise, Jack was a hollowed-out shell, sipping coffee that tasted like ashes. The wind stirred the trees, carrying with it the faintest echoes of that ghostly howl. Or perhaps it was only Jack's imagination. Rex sat at his feet, muscles taut, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the distant tree line as if expecting something or someone to emerge. Jack followed his gaze but saw nothing except the slow, rolling fog. Still, a deep unease gnawed at his core. Whatever was happening to him was escalating. The scar wasn't just a souvenir anymore. It had become a battleground, and Rex somehow could sense the enemy closing in before Jack even felt the first blow. Jack ran a trembling hand over Rex's head, muttering a hoarse, "Good boy," even though no amount of praise could capture the magnitude of what Rex was doing for him. As the sky lightened to a dull gray, Jack made a decision. He needed answers. He needed to know why his body was betraying him, why his dreams were infected with death, and why Rex, his battle-bonded brother, acted like the nightmare wasn't just inside Jack, it was hunting him for real. The day stretched out before him, bleak and uncertain. But somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the pulsing heat of the scar, a grim resolve began to harden. Jack wasn't going to run. He was going to fight. Because he wasn't just battling memories anymore. He was battling something real. And he had a feeling that very soon, whatever it was, forgot. The third night after Jack noticed the burning scar came colder and more silent than the others. The farmhouse stood still under a low, heavy sky as if holding its breath along with him. Jack had resisted sleeping all day, desperate to stay awake, but exhaustion was no longer a foe he could outmaneuver. It dragged at his bones with merciless hands. Rex hovered near, pacing between the living room and the front door, his every movement taut with a nervous energy Jack had never seen before. Jack reclined in the battered recliner, the same chair he had fallen asleep in countless times after coming home from deployments, and watched the clock tick toward midnight, knowing deep in his gut that tonight something would go wrong. The first hint came when Rex stopped pacing and settled uneasily by the hearth, his ears pinned back, his eyes wary as if he could sense an invisible battle brewing. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine, but forced himself to relax, just for a moment, just long enough to close his eyes. The nightmare seized him instantly, more violent than ever before. It was no longer just distant echoes of gunfire but an overwhelming onslaught, deafening, suffocating, relentless. Jack struggled in the dreamscape, reaching for something solid, something real, but it all dissolved into gun smoke and blood-soaked sand. Then came the howl, longer and more agonizing than anything he had heard before. A howl that tore open the sky and cracked through his heart. Jack's body jerked once, then stilled. In the real world, Rex bolted upright, snarling low under his breath, sensing Jack's distress. But tonight he hesitated a fraction too long. Jack's chest rose sharply, then fell still, his body limp, his face draining of color. Panic flared in Rex's instincts, burning away confusion, and he sprang across the room, leaping onto Jack's body with desperate force, his paws pounding against Jack's sternum. Jack did not react immediately, his body frighteningly unresponsive, but Rex refused to yield. He pressed harder, nudging and pushing, whining deep in his throat, a sound filled with terror and determination. After an eternity compressed into seconds, Jack gasped violently, his back arching, eyes snapping open in wild terror. his hands clutching at Rex's fur as if anchoring himself to life itself. He choked and coughed, lungs dragging in shuddering, ragged breaths. Rex whimpered once, his entire body trembling with the residual shock. Jack sagged back into the chair, drenched in cold sweat, every muscle screaming in protest. His mind reeled from the void he had just touched, a yawning blackness that felt far too real, far too final. Trembling violently, Jack cradled Rex's head against his chest, whispering broken thanks he wasn't even sure the dog could understand. His scar throbbed with feverish heat under his shirt, a pulsing brand of survival and warning. For the first time since returning from war, Jack knew this wasn't just a psychological battle. His body was failing him in a way he couldn't rationalize, and tonight had proven how close he had come to losing that battle completely. The next morning found Jack sitting stiffly in the sterile confines of Dr. Halverson's clinic, the bright white lights stabbing at his bloodshot eyes. Rex lay at his feet, never straying more than a few inches from his side. Dr. Halverson, an old army medic turned rural physician, frowned deeply as he reviewed the rushed overnight EKG Jack had been forced to endure. He tapped his pen against the clipboard, a steady, unsettling rhythm. Finally, he set the clipboard down with a grave sigh and met Jack's gaze squarely. "You're dealing with more than just PTSD, Sergeant," he said, his voice low and grim. Jack swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "What do you mean, Doc?" he rasped. Dr. Halverson folded his hands together, the deep lines of his face etched with concern. "You're exhibiting signs of what's called sleep dysrhythmia. It's rare, incredibly rare. Basically, under the stress of certain dream states, your heart's electrical signals misfire badly, enough to cause brief periods of cardiac arrest." Jack blinked, the words not quite sinking in. "Wait, you're telling me I almost died last night because I was dreaming?" he asked, incredulous. The doctor nodded grimly. "Your heart essentially forgets how to beat properly during the nightmare. You're incredibly lucky your dog responded the way he did. If Rex hadn't acted, you might not be sitting here now." Jack pressed a hand over his scar, feeling it pulse steadily under his palm as if mocking the tenuous grasp he still had on life. "Can it be fixed?" he asked, his voice rough with fear he could not hide. Dr. Halverson hesitated. "There are treatments, pacemakers, and experimental drugs, but none of them guarantee anything, especially not when the trigger is psychological rather than physiological." Jack slumped back in the chair, feeling as if the very ground beneath him was crumbling. He thought he had survived the worst already: war, loss, guilt, but this invisible enemy stalking him in his dreams was something he couldn't shoot or outrun. Rex shifted closer, sensing his master's distress, pressing his broad head against Jack's knee. Jack scratched absently behind Rex's ears, drawing strength from the steady thrum of the dog's presence. "There's more," Dr. Halverson said, his voice reluctant. "You mentioned the scar heating up, right?" Jack nodded, grimaced. "It's real, Doc, I'm not imagining it." Dr. Halverson leaned forward, his expression darkening. "I don't doubt it. Some cases of phantom nerve activation have been recorded after traumatic injuries. But the timing, the consistency with your episodes, it's almost like your body's warning you, like some part of you is sensing the danger before your conscious mind catches up." Jack's breath hitched. He thought of the howl, the overwhelming heat, the crushing feeling of being pulled down into the abyss. Something was wrong, something deeper than broken nerves or battered memories. Jack wasn't just sick. He was being hunted from the inside out. He met the doctor's gaze, a silent understanding passing between two men who had both seen too much. "What do I do?" Jack asked hoarsely. Dr. Halverson hesitated, then said softly, "Survive the night, Sergeant. Whatever it takes. Stay awake if you have to, because next time Rex might not be fast enough." Jack stood slowly, his legs stiff and uncertain under him, and gathered Rex's leash. His hand tightened around the worn leather as he nodded silently, the grim weight of the doctor's words settling over him like lead. As he stepped back into the blinding sunlight outside, the world seemed sharper, harsher, as if every shadow hid a threat. One thing was certain: if he let his guard down again, he might not wake up next time. Rex trotted beside him, unwavering as Jack climbed into the battered old pickup and drove home, every mile heavier than the last. The scar on his chest continued to pulse in a slow, steady rhythm, each beat whispering a truth Jack could no longer ignore. Nightfall was coming, and with it, the real battle was only just beginning. The drive back from the clinic felt longer than it should have, the battered truck rattling against every pothole like a dying heartbeat, the fields on either side blurring into a restless, colorless smear. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the slight tremor in his hands he could no longer deny, a constant reminder that something inside him was unraveling night by night. Rex sat rigid in the passenger seat, not lying down as usual but perched upright, his golden brown eyes locked on Jack's profile, hyper-agure, as if monitoring every breath, every heartbeat. Jack noticed it but said nothing. He was too tired to make jokes, too scared to ask the questions that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. By the time they pulled into the gravel driveway of the farmhouse, the late afternoon sun had fallen into a deep orange haze, bathing everything in a sickly, almost feverish glow. Jack opened the door and slid out slowly, his joints stiff, his body heavy, but before he could even close the truck door, Rex was at his side, pressing into him like a second shadow. Jack paused, looking down at the dog, a frown creasing his sun-weathered face. "You okay, buddy?" he muttered, ruffling the thick fur behind Rex's ears. Rex didn't respond the way he usually did, with a thump of his tail or a playful shove. Instead, he stayed glued to Jack's hip, his muscles coiled tight, his nostrils flaring slightly as if tasting the air for danger. Inside the house, the behavior only escalated. Jack tried to make coffee, but Rex followed him into the cramped kitchen. Standing so close, Jack almost tripped over him twice. When Jack went to the bathroom to splash cold water on his face, Rex nosed the door open and pushed his way inside, refusing to leave even when Jack growled, "For Christ's sake, Rex, give me some privacy." The dog simply sat there, his ears cocked, his body rigid, as if daring the very walls to move against them. Jack wiped his face dry and leaned against the sink, studying Rex through the foggy mirror. Something deep in his gut twisted. This wasn't loyalty. This was protection, desperate, relentless protection, and it scared Jack more than he wanted to admit. As night fell, Rex's vigilance intensified. Every sound outside, a branch snapping, a gust of wind whistling under the eaves, made him bristle and growl low in his throat. Jack, exhausted beyond reason, slumped into the recliner, pulling the old wool blanket over his legs, and watched Rex pace the living room in tight, agitated circles. Every instinct Jack had honed on foreign battlefields screamed at him that something was coming, something Rex could feel in his bones but Jack could not yet see. He tried to distract himself by sorting through the battered wooden chest at the foot of his bed, a relic filled with the broken artifacts of his service, medals he never displayed, photographs he couldn't bear to look at, and among them a thick manila envelope marked K9 deployment records. Jack froze, the envelope half buried beneath a pile of faded letters. He didn't remember putting it there. With slow, hesitant fingers, he pulled it free and sat down heavily on the bed, Rex instantly at his side, watching with unwavering focus. Jack opened the envelope and a cascade of documents spilled out. Crisp forms stamped with military insignias, clinical evaluations, training certifications, mission reports. He skimmed them absently at first, but then a phrase caught his eye and held it like a snare. K9 subject Rex classification, MWD military working dog, specialty, cardiac event detection and emergency response. Jack blinked, rereading the line, his throat tightening painfully. Cardiac event detection. His mind raced, piecing fragments together. He remembered now, dimly back in Kandahar, Rex hadn't just sniffed out explosives or tracked enemy combatants. He had been part of a specialized pilot program designed to detect early signs of cardiac arrest and strokes among soldiers in high-stress zones. The idea had been experimental, almost absurd at the time, but it had saved lives, earning Rex commendations that Jack had forgotten in the chaos of survival. Rex wasn't just a soldier's companion. He was a living, breathing early warning system, trained to recognize the invisible flicker of death before it struck. Jack let the papers fall from his hands, his vision swimming. It made too much sense. Rex's obsession with staying close, his panic every time Jack began to drift toward sleep, his refusal to let Jack out of his sight even for a minute, He wasn't being paranoid or overprotective. He was doing exactly what he had been trained to do, guarding Jack against an enemy no one else could see. Against Jack's own failing heart, Jack pressed both hands to his temples, overwhelmed by a tidal wave of gratitude, fear, and guilt. He had dragged Rex home believing he was saving the dog, giving him a peaceful retirement after a life of war. But all this time, it was Rex who had been saving him again and again. Night after night, fight. The realization hit Jack with the weight of a sledgehammer. He wasn't just fighting PTSD, bad memories, or survivor's guilt. He was literally surviving because Rex refused to let him die in his sleep. The scar on his chest burned as if in confirmation, a steady, pulsing reminder that the real war was far from over. Jack ran a shaking hand over Rex's broad head, murmuring, "You're a damn hero, boy." But the words felt hollow, inadequate, a pale echo of the truth. Rex leaned into his touch, letting out a low, rumbling whine that sent a chill racing down Jack's spine. Because if Rex, the battle-hardened, death-sensing K9, was this on edge, it meant whatever was coming wasn't just another nightmare. It was real, and it was getting closer. The night settled over the farmhouse like a living thing, thick and oppressive, wrapping its cold fingers around Jack's throat as he sat in the dim kitchen, nursing a mug of black coffee he had no intention of drinking. Rex paced silently across the scuffed wooden floor, every movement taut, eyes darting toward every creak and shadow, with a vigilance that set Jack's nerves on edge. The envelope of K9 records still lay open on the table. The words burned into Jack's mind, a revelation that refused to loosen its grip on him. The truth gnawed at him relentlessly. Rex wasn't just a protector by nature. He was built, trained, sharpened into a weapon against death itself. And now that instinct was screaming louder than it ever had before. Jack pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes, exhausted, fragmented, unsure of where exhaustion ended at night. But when he finally drifted into sleep, slumped awkwardly at the kitchen table, the nightmare came for him, harder than ever. At first, it unfolded the same way it always did. Gunfire ripping apart the night, smoke choking his lungs, the desperate howling that tore through his mind like shrapnel. But then something shifted. Jack found himself standing over a body. No, not just a body, a soldier. One of their own, and clutched tightly in the corpse's mangled hand was a military badge, smeared with blood and half buried in the sand. Jack's dream self knelt down, heart hammering, and turned the badge over. The design was simple but unmistakable. An eagle clutching arrows, wings spread wide, encircled by a laurel wreath. His breath hitched even in the dream. He knew that badge, not just from a lifetime of military symbols, but from a specific memory, sharp and burning, buried deep beneath years of forced forgetting. The dream twisted violently, dragging Jack backward through flashes of fire and sand and screaming, then slammed him awake with brutal force. He bolted upright, knocking the mug off the table, coffee splattering across the floor. Rex was already there, his massive head pressing against Jack's ribs, grounding him, anchoring him to the here and now. Jack sat there, panting, drenched in sweat, the image of the blood-slick badge seared behind his eye. It wasn't just a dream. It wasn't just PTSD playing tricks. It was a memory. Hands shaking, Jack staggered toward the battered chest in his bedroom, throwing open the lid and tearing through old gear, medals, uniforms, dog tags, until at the very bottom he found it, a battered, sand-scoured journal wrapped in a crumbling canvas cover. He hadn't looked at it in years, couldn't bring himself. Now his fingers trembled as he unwrapped it and flipped through brittle, yellowed pages, covered in cramped handwriting. Halfway through, a photograph fell out, curling as it hit the floor. Jack stooped and picked it up, and the breath left his body. It was a picture taken during his second tour, of 5 men in dusty fatigues, grinning for the camera, standing in front of a makeshift barracks. Jack recognized each of them immediately. Cooper, Ramirez, Dales, Wen, and himself. Younger, thinner, his eyes still carrying the glint of hope that had long since died. But it wasn't the faces that froze him in place. It was the badge pinned to Cooper's chest, the same eagle and laurel wreath, identical to the one from his dream. The blood-stained badge, the missing piece. Jack sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the photo so tightly the edges crumpled under his fingers. Cooper had died on that tour, killed in what they were told was an ambush, Quick, chaotic, nothing anyone could have done. Or so he had believed. But now, the dream peeled back the years and whispered a different truth. Cooper hadn't just died in battle. There had been something more, something buried, hidden under layers of trauma and silence. Jack's head throbbed with the pressure of the revelation clawing its way to the surface. He remembered flashes now, the stench of diesel and blood, the frantic radio calls that had been silenced too quickly, the look in Ramirez's eyes when they found Cooper's body, something wild and broken, something that never made sense until now. Jack had buried it deep, too deep, but now it surged upward with a force that left him gasping. The badge wasn't just a symbol of a fallen comrade. It was a marker of betrayal, of secrets never meant to see daylight. He looked at Rex, who sat stiffly nearby, watching him with an expression Jack could only call mournful, as if Rex too understood that the past was no longer willing to stay buried. Jack rubbed the scar over his heart, feeling the heat building again, a slow, insistent burn that matched the pulsing panic in his veins. His dreams weren't random. They weren't some misfiring of a damaged mind. They were memories, locked away behind trauma and time, now clawing their way back with teeth and claws, because Jack needed to remember. He needed to face whatever truth he had helped bury all those years ago. The kitchen clock ticked onward, the minutes bleeding into hours, but Jack didn't move. He sat there staring at the crumpled photograph, the badge glinting under the dim light, feeling the full weight of what was awakening inside him. Outside the window, the wind howled, carrying with it the scent of earth and rain and something else, something older and meaner, like the ghosts of the desert rising to demand their due. Rex let out a low growl, his hackles rising, as if he too sensed the storm building just beyond the fragile safety of their four walls. Jack's fingers tightened around the photograph until his knuckles whitened. He had thought the worst battles of his life were behind him. He had thought the dead stayed buried. He had thought wrong. The past was awake now, stalking him through his dreams, and it wasn't going to stop until Jack remembered everything, until he faced what he had spent a lifetime trying to forget. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The photograph trembled in Jack's hand as the weight of memory crushed down on him, heavier than any pack he had ever carried into battle, the badge's blood-smeared glint burning behind his eyes like a brand, and for a long, breathless moment he simply sat there, adrift in a rising tide of horror he could no longer deny or suppress. The room seemed to warp around him, shrieking, the walls pressing inward, and somewhere in the spinning haze of recalled pain and betrayal, a single undeniable truth cut through. He hadn't just witnessed a battlefield casualty. He had witnessed a murder, sanctioned and buried under layers of official lies. The images came back in jagged flashes, Cooper's panicked face as he stumbled through the smoke, reaching out, calling Jack's name, the sudden, sharp crack of a rifle not from the enemy line but from behind, close. Too close, Ramirez lowering his weapon with grim efficiency. No hesitation, no remorse, only cold necessity. Jack had frozen that day, paralyzed by disbelief, by the shattering realization that the rules of loyalty and brotherhood he had lived by were nothing more than myths to those who had decided Cooper's life was expendable. The official report had come later, sterilized and concise. Death due to enemy engagement under a hostile fire. Jack had swallowed the lie like poison, buried the memory deep, convinced himself it had to be a mistake, a momentary madness he could unsee if he just tried hard enough. But now the dreams were tearing the seals off those old wounds, dragging the truth into the light whether Jack wanted it or not. Rex whined low in his throat, shifting closer, his body a trembling pillar of support, and Jack dropped a hand to the dog's thick fur, grateful beyond words for the grounding touch. He remembered then, with sudden, painful clarity, that Rex had been there that day too, stationed alongside their unit as a battlefield K9 trained for search and rescue. Rex had been the one who found Cooper's body after the ambush, or what they had been told was an ambush. Jack clenched his fists, the memory tightening its grip. He recalled now the way Rex had refused to leave Cooper's side, barking furiously, snarling at Ramirez when he tried to drag the corpse away under the guise of extracting it to safety. Everyone had chalked it up to K9 loyalty at the time, a broken dog grieving a fallen soldier. But now Jack saw it for what it really was. Rex had known the truth even then. Jack staggered to his feet, pacing the room, his heart slamming against his ribs, the old scar over his heart pulsing with feverish intensity. His mind raced, connecting dots he had long ignored. Ramirez's sudden promotion after the incident, the missing radio logs, the strange, tight-lipped silence that had fallen over the base in the weeks that followed. Whatever operation they had stumbled onto out there in the desert, whatever Cooper had found, it had been enough to get him executed by his own people, and Jack, by surviving, had unknowingly become a liability too. A wave of nausea rolled through him, cold sweat beading on his forehead. He leaned heavily against the wall, breathing through his teeth, willing himself to stay upright. He needed answers, needed to piece together what Cooper had uncovered that had made him a target, but the memories remained fragmented, slippery, refusing to solidify fully. He turned back toward Rex, who was sitting perfectly still now, watching him with an intensity that bordered on pleading. Jack dropped to his knees in front of the dog, gripping the fur at Rex's shoulders. "You saw it," he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt and dawning terror. "You saw everything, didn't you?" Rex licked Jack's face once, a slow, deliberate motion that seemed less like affection and more like acknowledgement. Jack closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against Rex's. Somehow, impossibly, Rex had carried the burden of that day alongside him all these years, the only witness left alive to a crime that had been erased from every official record. Jack pulled back, his mind whirling. If Rex remembered, and Jack was certain now that he did, then maybe there was a way to trigger more of Jack's own suppressed memories, to uncover the full extent of what had been done. He rose unsteadily, pacing again, his mind leaping from thought to thought with feverish energy. Somewhere in the rubble of forgotten missions and classified operations, the key to the present danger lay hidden. Jack could feel it, a rotten core festering beneath the surface, poisoning him even now. The nightmares weren't just trauma, they were alarms, warning bells ringing louder with each passing night, and ignoring them was no longer an option. Outside, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, and Jack shivered despite the warmth still clinging to the late autumn air. He turned back toward the battered chest, rifling through it until he found an old field journal, the pages yellowed and brittle, crammed with field notes, coordinates, sketches, snippets of overheard conversations. His hands trembled as he flipped through it, searching for anything, any clue, until finally he found it. A scrawled note in his own handwriting, barely legible, circled 3 times in heavy pen stroke. "Dagger sight. Do not report. Eyes only." Jack's heart dropped into his stomach. Dagger sight. He remembered now, the whispered rumors among the men, the forbidden supply drops in the dead of night, the convoys that left but never returned. He traced the words with a shaking finger, the scar over his heart flaring so hot it felt like it might sear straight through his ribcage. Dagger sight had been the center of it all, the classified location Cooper had accidentally stumbled across, the secret he had died for. And now, somehow, the memory of that betrayal, that buried operation, was killing Jack from the inside out. Jack stuffed the journal into his jacket, grabbed Rex's leash with a jerk, and headed for the door. He didn't know where he was going yet, but instinct screamed that sitting here waiting to be picked off by memories or by whatever forces were determined to keep the truth buried was suicide. Rex surged to his feet, tail high, muscles rippling with tension, ready to follow wherever Jack led. Together they stepped out into the storm-thick air, the first cold raindrops spattering against the earth like gunfire. Somewhere out there, the answers waited, and Jack had no illusions anymore. The past wasn't done with him. It had only just begun to bleed into the present. The rain came down in a cold, relentless sheet as Jack trudged back toward the farmhouse with Rex close at his heels. The field journal pressed against his ribs beneath his jacket like a loaded weapon, his mind spinning with grim revelations and darker possibilities. The night had swallowed the landscape whole, no stars, no moon, just an endless, churning blackness pressing down from all sides. And as they approached the battered porch steps, a cold shiver prickled the back of Jack's neck, a primal warning honed from years of living on the edge of death. Rex hesitated at the bottom step, his nose lifted to the wind, body stiffened, hackles rising slowly like a shadow stretching toward dawn. Jack paused, scanning the darkness, every sense sharpening until even the ticking of the cooling engine behind him sounded like a hammer blow. For a long moment there was only the rain and the wind, but then he caught a flicker of movement beyond the tree line, a silhouette vanishing into the mist like a phantom. Jack's hand drifted instinctively toward the sidearm tucked into the back of his waistband. The old instincts kicking in, the reflexive cataloging of threat vectors, escape routes, angles of approach. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. He didn't believe in coincidence anymore. Not after what he had uncovered. Not after what he had remembered. These weren't petty thieves or lost hikers. They were hunters sent to finish the job that had begun years ago in blood and silence. Jack pushed Rex gently toward the door, urging him inside, every nerve screaming to bolt the locks, board the windows, dig a trench if he had to. But he forced himself to move with slow, deliberate calm, knowing panic would only make him a target. Inside, he locked every door, wedged furniture against the weak spots, and set up crude alarms with pots and pans and tripwires fashioned from fishing line, the kind of desperate measures that spoke volumes about the kind of war he knew was coming. Rex prowled the house, nose to the floor, tail rigid, emitting low rumples of warning that never rose to full barking, a soldier's discipline even after all these years. Jack found himself pacing, unable to sit still, heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He checked the field journal again, memorizing the coordinates he had scribbled a lifetime ago, the location that might hold the final piece of the puzzle or the final nail in his coffin. Hours crawled by, the storm battering the house, the wind moaning through the broken eaves like a chorus of the damned. Jack stayed awake by sheer force of will, but as dawn approached, the adrenaline began to drain away, leaving him hollowed out and vulnerable. He fought to keep his eyes open, knowing what awaited him if he slipped into unconsciousness, but exhaustion wove its heavy hands through his limbs, dragging him down. He brewed coffee so strong it could have peeled paint, drank it black and scalding, but even that wasn't enough. At some point near sunrise, Jack finally collapsed into the chair by the window, his body surrendering to the inevitable, his head lolling forward, breathing deep and slow. That was when they struck. At first, Rex stirred uneasily, his nose twitching, ears flicking back, but then he whimpered a thin, confused sound Jack had never heard from him before, and staggered sideways, his legs buckling under him. Jack mumbled something incoherent, half-awareous, but Rex tried valiantly to crawl back to his side, his body betraying him, nothing, muscles trembling uncontrollably. In the shadows outside, dark figures slithered closer, barely visible against the roiling mist, their outlines blurred but unmistakably human, unmistakably armed. One of them paused near the side of the house, bending low, tossing something small and metallic into the basement window. A gas canister. Jack's fogged brain registered dimly, too late to react. Inside, Rex collapsed fully now, breathing shallow and rapid, eyes glassy with pain. Jack stirred weakly, trapped in the drowning depths of a nightmare, his scar burning hotter than ever, the memory of betrayal merging with the present danger in a nauseating swirl. The gas spread quickly, an acrid, oily stink that clawed at his lungs even as he fought to wake, fought to pull himself back from the brink. But the dream had him now, its hooks buried deep in his mind's eye. He saw Ramirez again, lowering the rifle, saw Cooper's body crumple like a marionette with its strings cut, heard Rex's furious barking echoing across the battlefield. In the real world, Jack's breathing slowed to a terrifying crawl, his body sagging in the chair as the gas did its work. Rex, too weak to stand, managed a single, pitiful growl before slumping against Jack's feet, his body twitching involuntarily. The intruders moved closer, emboldened by the silence, their dark shapes peeling away from the trees and converging on the farmhouse. Jack was defenseless, trapped between the nightmare in his mind and the poison in his lungs, unable to fight, unable to run, unable even to call for help. The storm outside reached a fever pitch, the thunder cracking so close it shook the foundations of the house. But inside, everything moved in eerie, soundless slow motion. A figure reached the porch, boots thudding heavily against the rotting wood. a gloved hand reaching for the doorknob, twisting it slowly, silently. Another figure slipped around the side, cutting the power lines with a practiced flick of a blade, plunging the house into... Jack's eyelids fluttered, a broken, instinctive effort to rouse himself, but it was useless. Rex let out one last weak snarl, a final act of defiance against the tide closing in, but even that sound faded quickly into a shallow whimper. The front door creaked open, a sliver of cold, wet air slashing into the room. Jack slumped deeper into unconsciousness, the dream tightening its grip, the battlefield merging seamlessly with the farmhouse, the past and present indistinguishable. In his dream, Cooper's blood pooled at Jack's boots. In reality, rainwater and poison seeped across the cracked hardwood floor toward his chair. And outside, unseen by the advancing men, a new shadow detached itself from the storm, watching, waiting. The door swung inward on rusty hinges as the first intruder stepped inside, his silhouette framed against the writhing storm beyond, his movements cautious but confident. A man used to entering spaces where he wasn't welcome, where life hung on the thinnest edge of violence. In the poisoned stillness of the farmhouse, Rex lay sprawled beside Jack's chair, his breath shallow, his body trembling from the toxins seeping through his blood. Yet deep inside the battered shell of his body, the instincts honed through years of battlefield survival flared to life, burning hotter than any venom. His ears flicked weakly at the faint scrape of boots against wood, his eyes tracking the blurry movement of shadows converging around the room. Somewhere buried beneath the haze of pain and paralysis, Rex's mind recognized the mortal threat bearing down on his human, on the bond he had sworn to protect even when words and strength failed. With a low, guttural snarl that seemed torn from the depths of his being, Rex forced his failing muscles to move, inching forward through sheer willpower, dragging himself across the floor inch by agonizing inch, his nose catching the faint metallic scent of the gas mingled with the sweat of the men now inside his territory. His gaze locked onto the nearest tripwire Jack had rigged earlier. Fishing lines stretched taut between two chairs leading to a precarious stack of pans and metal tools, and with a last, desperate surge of energy, Rex lunged forward, snapping his jaws onto the line and jerking it free with a violent tug. The house erupted into a cacophony of clanging metal and crashing pots, the sudden racket shattering the heavy silence like gunfire, and the intruders jerked reflexively, some ducking, some freezing in place, startled by the noise, their practiced formation faltering for a precious heartbeat. Upstairs, an old battery siren rigged by Jack during his frantic preparations whined to life, filling the house with a shrill, rising wail that sliced through the fog clouding Jack's brain like a scalpel. In the chair, Jack stirred, his eyelids fluttering, his breathing hitching painfully as the noise fought the grip of the dream holding him hostage. Inside the nightmare, Jack stood again on the blood-soaked sand, Cooper's broken body at his feet, Ramirez's smoking rifle pointed straight at him, betrayal and regret written across every line of his face. Jack's fists clenched at his sides, the helpless rage boiling up as he relived that moment of paralysis, of failure. But this time, somewhere distant, a siren wailed, urgent, insistent, pulling at the edges of the dream, ripping stitches loose from the wound memory had tried to keep closed. Jack staggered forward in the dream and in reality, his hand reaching for the weapon still tucked into the back of his waistband, fingers closing around the worn grip by sheer instinct. The first intruder cursed under his breath, motioning sharply for the others to spread out and secure the room, but it was too late. Jack's eyes snapped open, still glazed, still half-trapped in the liminal space between dream and waking, but his body remembered what his mind had not yet caught up to. He moved with the speed of training burned into muscle memory, drawing the pistol in a smooth, practiced arc, sighting down the barrel as if he were back in the kill house at Fort Bragg, not slumped half unconscious in his own living room. The lead intruder raised his weapon too slowly. Jack squeezed the trigger, the report deafening in the confined space, the recoil a familiar jolt up his arm. The bullet struck the man's center mass, driving him backward into the wall with a grunt of shock, his rifle clattering from nerveless fingers. The others hesitated for a fatal moment, caught between disbelief and fear, and Jack capitalized on it, levering himself upright against the chair, firing again. The second shot wild, but the third catching another figure in the shoulder, sending him spinning with a howl of pain. Rex, galvanized by the gunfire, staggered to his feet, swaying but determined, baring his teeth in a snarl that was more fury than strength. His body a trembling wreck. Jack stumbled toward him, grabbing Rex's collar with one hand, dragging the dog behind the overturned couch as cover as bullets tore into the furniture, splinters and stuffing raining down in a blizzard of destruction. Jack's head pounded, the gas still clawing at his lungs, but adrenaline flooded his system, cutting through the fog, sharpening his senses to a razor's edge. He peeked over the couch, gauging the positions of the remaining intruders. Heart pounding, mind racing. They weren't giving up. Whoever had sent them had made it very clear. Jack Hayes and his dog weren't supposed to see another sunrise. Gritting his teeth, Jack checked his magazine half empty and spared a glance at Rex, who gave a weak wag of his tail, eyes blazing with fierce loyalty despite the tremors racking his frame. Jack gave him a grim nod, the unspoken promise passing between them. We fight together, we survive together. The gunfire abated for a moment, the attackers regrouping, whispering in urgent, angry tones. Jack didn't wait. He launched himself up and over the couch, moving low and fast, firing on the move. The shots wild but disruptive enough to drive the attackers back toward the broken door. One of them managed to wing him, a searing line of fire across his upper arm. But Jack barely registered the pain, too focused on clearing the room, on protecting Rex, on surviving the night that had been carefully orchestrated to end them both. Rex, dragging himself with pitiful strength, managed to reach the front window, barking hoarsely into the storm. A raw, desperate signal Jack hoped anyone might hear. Outside, the storm howled louder, the rain falling in sheets so thick the attackers began to lose visibility, their shouts growing more panicked as Jack pressed his advantage, driving them step by step back into the night they had emerged from. But even as the tide turned, Jack knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. These men were just the first wave. Whoever had orchestrated this wouldn't give up so easily, and Jack, barely able to stay on his feet, his body battered and lungs burning, knew he was running out of time. The wind howled against the battered walls of the farmhouse as Jack stumbled backward behind the broken couch, dragging Rex with him, both their bodies battered and bloody, the storm outside raging like a mirror of the chaos inside. He pressed his wounded arm against his side to slow the bleeding, feeling the sticky warmth soak into his torn jacket, his mind racing with the grim knowledge that this fight was far from over. Somewhere beyond the ruins of the living room, he could hear the remaining intruders regrouping, their angry shouts swallowed by the shriek of the wind, and Jack knew they would not retreat again. They would come back with ruthless precision, and this time they would make sure nothing was left breathing. Rex shifted beside him, struggling to lift his head, his ribs heaving with the effort, and Jack placed a trembling hand on the dog's neck, feeling the rapid, uneven pulse beneath the coarse fur, the strength that refused to die even as the body failed. Jack forced himself to his feet, dragging Rex up with him, every muzzle screaming in protest, and together they moved toward the narrow hallway leading to the back of the house, where the walls were thicker and the angles sharper, easier to defend. They made it halfway before a shot rang out from the shadows outside the broken door, the cracks splitting the air like lightning, and Jack saw the muzzle flash an instant before the world seemed to slow around him. He tried to throw himself aside, tried to shield Rex, but the dog moved faster, instinct overriding pain, loyalty overriding fear. Rex lunged, his body a blur, and Jack watched in horror as the bullet struck the dog's side with a sickening thud, the force of the impact spinning Rex sideways mid-air, before he crumpled heavily to the ground. "No!" Jack's scream tore from his throat, raw and broken, but there was no time for grief, only action. His training took over and he fired back into the darkness, the shots wild but enough to drive the shooter into cover, buying precious seconds. He dropped to his knees beside Rex, hands moving frantically over the dog's side, feeling the hot, sticky blood pouring between his fingers, the ragged breathing that grew weaker with each passing moment. "Hold on, buddy," Jack choked out, cradling Rex's head against his chest. rocking slightly as if he could will strength back into the battered body he held. Rex's eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain but still burning with fierce, unyielding loyalty, and with a trembling whimper he tried to rise, legs kicking weakly against the blood-slicked floor. Jack sobbed once, harsh and guttural, gripping the dog. "Stay down, boy, you did good. You did so damn good," he whispered, but Rex would not listen, would not surrender. Summoning a strength Jack didn't know he still possessed, Rex dragged himself inch by agonizing inch up Jack's chest, claws scrabbling for purchase, blood smearing across Jack's torn jacket. Jack felt it then, the slow faltering of his own heart, the telltale signs of his body slipping again toward the abyss, the same way it had during the nightmares, the same way the scar over his heart had always warned him. His vision blurred, the edges darkening, the world tilting crazily as his body betrayed him, collapsing under the weight of blood loss, poison, and fear. But Rex, broken and dying, understood even what Jack could no longer say aloud. With a final, shuddering effort, Rex pressed the weight of his body against Jack's chest, the heavy thud of his presence forcing Jack's heart to respond, to fight, to remember its rhythm. Jack gasped, the sudden pressure shocking his system, his pulse stumbling but catching, his lungs dragging in a ragged breath that tasted of blood and smoke and rain. Rex collapsed fully against him then, his body stilling, his breathing so faint Jack could barely feel it, but his mission complete. Jack clutched the dog to him, burying his face in the thick, blood-matted fur, his body shaking with silent sobs, not from weakness, but from a grief so pure and raw it threatened to tear him apart from the inside out. The minutes stretched unbearably long, the storm pounding against the broken house, the attackers regrouping somewhere out there in the darkness, but Jack stayed still, gathering what little strength he had left, drawing it from the fading warmth of the dog who had once again saved his life at the cost of his own. He could feel Rex's heartbeat fluttering weakly against his own, a fading echo of loyalty and love and defiance. And Jack knew he had no right to waste the sacrifice that had been given so freely, so fiercely. He gritted his teeth, forcing his body to move, to fight the despair clawing at his soul. He shifted Rex gently to the ground, whispering a promise he didn't have the breath to speak aloud, and rose to his feet, every joint screaming, every nerve alight, and parched him. His vision blurred again, but he wiped the blood from his eyes with the back of his hand, raising his weapon with grim determination. He was still breathing, he was still fighting, because Rex had made sure of it. Beyond the broken door, he saw the shadows move again, cautious now, wary after their initial failure. Jack squared his shoulders, feeling the old rage, the old fire ignite deep in his bones. They wanted him dead. They wanted Rex erased. They wanted the truth buried forever. But they had underestimated what it meant to fight a man who had already died 100 deaths in his dreams, and refused to stay down. The first figure crept closer, weapon raised, silhouette blurred by rain and fear. Jack tightened his grip on the pistol, feeling the cold metal steady him, ground him. His pulse hammered in his ears, not with panic but with fierce, burning clarity. He was not done, not yet, and as he took aim, somewhere in the house behind him, Rex stirred once more. Jack squeezed the trigger without hesitation, the bullet cutting through the mist and rain and striking the intruder squarely in the chest, sending him sprawling backward into the mud with a muted grunt. Another shadow bolted into the darkness, vanishing among the trees, leaving behind only the echo of retreat and the acrid stink of fear. Jack stood there for a long moment, the pistol trembling slightly in his blood-slicked hand, the storm battering his battered frame, the house at his back sagging under the weight of violence and survival. Slowly, painfully, he turned and staggered back inside, his boots squelching against the soaked, ruined floorboards, his breath rasping like sandpaper against his ribs. He found Rex where he had left him, curled in a broken heap near the shattered remains of the old couch, his body battered and still, his breathing shallow but miraculously present. Jack dropped to his knees beside him, the pistol slipping from his grasp to clatter unnoticed onto the floor. He pressed his forehead against Rex's, feeling the faint, struggling heat of life radiating through the dog's trembling frame, and whispered hoarsely, "We're still here, buddy. We're still breathing." Rex stirred weakly, a soft whine escaping his throat. his tail twitching once in a movement so small it might have been imagined. Jack gathered Rex into his arms as best he could, lifting him carefully, feeling every labored heartbeat as if it were his own. He carried the dog to the back room, barricading the door with an overturned dresser, then collapsed beside him onto the cold, cracked tile floor. His entire body screamed in protest, every injury screaming louder than the next. But Jack ignored it all, his entire focus fixed on the wounded warrior he cradled against his chest. He pressed his palm against his own scarred chest, expecting the familiar pulsing burn, the signal of danger, but found only stillness, a strange and unnerving calm where fire had always raged. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the scar over Jack's heart was cool, inert, nothing more than a faded reminder instead of a warning flare. He blinked, bewildered, a part of him expecting the nightmare to surge back, to drag him once more into the suffocating grip of memory and death. But the darkness did not come. Instead, a profound silence settled over him, heavy but not oppressive, the kind of silence he had not known since long before the desert, before the betrayal, before the endless nights of fighting to simply stay alive. He shifted slightly, cradling Rex closer, and realized with a jolt that his heartbeat too had steadied, beating a slow, even rhythm against his ribs, strong and sure. The farmhouse around them was a ruin, the windows shattered, the furniture splintered, the air thick with smoke and dust. But inside that ruined room, a fragile, stubborn peace bloomed like a flower in a battlefield. Jack leaned his head back against the wall, exhaustion crashing over him like a tide, and closed his eyes, letting the weight of survival, of truth faced and fought for, finally settle into his bones. He drifted in and out of a restless half-sleep, the storm outside gradually ebbing into a steady, cleansing rain, the sky beyond the broken windows lightening from pitch black to a sullen, bruised gray. When Jack stirred again, it was to a faint, almost imperceptible movement against his chest. He opened his eyes slowly, the world swimming into focus, and looked down to find Rex watching him with tired but clear eyes. The kind of look that spoke volumes even without words. For a long, breathless moment, neither of them moved, the connection between them as tangible as the blood and sweat binding them together. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Rex's mouth twitched upward in a tiny, weary smile, a flash of warmth and mischief and relief all tangled together in that one simple expression. Jack let out a shaky laugh, tears burning at the corners of his eyes, and ruffled Rex's blood-matted fur with a hand that barely managed to stay steady. "Yeah, I see you, old man," he whispered, voice breaking with emotion. "You did it. You brought me back." Rex's eyelids fluttered as he struggled to keep them open, but the smile lingered, stubborn, defiant, victorious. It was the first time Jack had ever seen Rex smile, truly smile, and he knew with bone-deep certainty that the dog understood what had just happened. Understood that he had completed the mission he had carried silently for years. Jack's chest ached, not from injury but from a fierce, overwhelming gratitude that filled every hollow, broken place inside him. For the first time in years he felt whole, felt free, not from the scars on his body but from the chains around his soul. The nightmares had always been a prison, a battlefield he could never win, but Rex had stormed that battlefield and dragged him back into the light, had refused to let the past bury him no matter how deep it had tried to dig. Jack brushed a hand gently across Rex's head, feeling the slow, steady beat of life still pulsing there, fragile but unyielding. Outside, the clouds began to break, the first pale fingers of sunlight piercing through the dissipating storm, casting long, golden beams across the wreckage. Jack tilted his head back against the wall, letting the light wash over him, letting it cleanse the shadows from his mind. He didn't know what would come next, whether more enemies would come, whether he would ever find full justice for Cooper, whether the scars of betrayal would ever truly fade. But for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't afraid. He was alive. He was free. And he wasn't alone. Jack tightened his hold on Rex, feeling the dog's breath ghost across his arm, and closed his eyes again, not in fear, but in peace. The smile on Rex's face, the last thing he saw before sleep finally, blessedly, claimed him without nightmares. If this story reached your heart the way it reached mine, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more powerful journeys. I would love to hear what part of Jack and Rex's story stayed with you the most. Was it the moment Rex saved him against all odds? Or the final smile that said everything without a single word? And where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments. Your words matter more than you think.